Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode. Farmers and ranchers are often referred to as the first conservationists since their livelihoods come from the natural resources in their environment. So it's in their best interest to be as sustainable as possible and to pass that respect for nature on to their children. Meghan Sittler is a great example of such generational conservation inheritance, and she's fortunate enough to be living her passion for natural resources as director of the Spring Creek Prairie Audubon Center near Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm happy to be able to welcome her as our guest on this edition of the Water for Food podcast. First of all, Meghan, tell us about the Spring Creek Prairie Audubon Center and what you do there.
So Spring Creek Prairie Audubon Center is an 850-acre tallgrass prairie preserve, just about 15 minutes from downtown Lincoln, so 3 miles south of Denton. It is the vast majority of the property, just about 620 or so acres, are original tallgrass prairie, so tallgrass prairie that's never been plowed. And the remaining areas are comprised of woodland and restored tallgrass prairie, as well as wetlands affiliated with Spring Creek, which headwaters just about 1.5 miles south of where I'm sitting right now in our visitor center, and picks up seeps and springs as it moves through Spring Creek, and then ends up connecting to Haynes Branch and on through the Salt Creek watershed in Lincoln. The Spring Creek Prairie's been around since 1998 when National Audubon Society purchased it from Kathy O'Brien, and her family had owned this property since railroad days, and she wanted to retire and move south, and but couldn't stand to think about it turning into houses or golf courses, and so National Audubon was able to come forward and purchase the property, and we have maintained it as a nature center, as a wildlife sanctuary, focusing primarily on grassland birds and the management that they need to survive in our current climate and current landscape.
So you've been with the center for about 2 years. How did you actually first become interested in water management and conservation?
Yeah, so I've been here as the center director since September of 2018. I grew up just over the hill from Spring Creek Prairie, about 2.5 miles. And my family operated a farm and ranch. My oldest sister and her husband are still there, and we always were taught, my dad's principle was, leave more than you take. And also trying to have that shared understanding of the use of our resources. And so from the top of the hill, and you can see downtown Lincoln, and we also were, farming. And so we're always just kind of naturally instilled with the balance that it takes to, utilize the resources that we depend on for life, like water, and also for agriculture and our economy. And so really, throughout my schooling was really just kind of focused on how we build that collaborative management and that idea of, making sure there's seats at the table so that we're managing for people, with people, and with the environment in mind. And I ended up on a project working on Missouri River in graduate school, really focused on that mindset and working with agricultural producers and industry and fish and wildlife agencies and organizations. And from then on, just kind of carried that mindset through my career and was able to work in different watersheds and different organizations, but really with that focus of, how to best manage that shared critical resource.
Well, you kind of got into this already, but I knew you grew up on a farm there and wanted to ask you about how that growing up on the farm impacted the way you view conservation. You basically answered that, but delve into that a little more. Maybe give us some little anecdotes about how your parents were on the farm and how that impacted you.
Sure. So I think, my dad and mom were kind of the renegade farmers and ranchers in the area, in the mindset of, working with Nebraska Extension or working with wildlife agencies or other cooperative partners, the Natural Resources District, on trying some of the technologies or and trying to how to best incorporate and understand that. And so we kind of lived, that ongoing adaptive management at that time before we called it that. And that mindset of instilling conservation and continuing to learn about the resources and how best to use it. But one of the things that I have always, I think I see is how I got maybe that collaborative mindset and shared resource perspective was that anytime they tried anything, whether that was first people to no-till or use biosolids from the wastewater treatment facility or put an easement on our tallgrass prairie, my parents took the time to talk to all the neighbors about why they were making that decision and what they hoped would come of it. And just, when you drive past a field that's no-till, it looks a little messier than those that have been tilled. And so they're like, just wait, don't make fun of us. Wait and see what happens. And then, through that process of just kind of spending that time, I think that communication and transmission of knowledge and risk factor was removed a little bit. And we just always spent, time outdoors. My sisters always would say, for me, they didn't know, or if they didn't know where I was, they assumed I was one of two places. And more often than not, it was on our tallgrass prairie, which is also spring fed, and really just kind of trouncing around out there or learning, different flowers or just spending some time kind of soaking that in. So, and I think, one of the things that I have come to understand in my conservation career and thinking about where I came from was, we often talk about in conservation, like when you buy water rights or you buy the prairie and you can have a generational impact. I think if you have that element of having private landowners involved in that management and instilling that conservation ethic, you don't only have generational, you have multi-generational. When I think about my family, my older sister and husband are back there with two kids who are understanding and embracing that. And it's just kind of carried through, whether we're active on the farm or we're working away in other careers, such as myself and my other sister.
Well, you said your parents were kind of renegades. Do you feel like more people, more farmers, more people in agriculture have come to embrace this more type of collaborative approach?
I think so. I think, with the advent of, so much technology and information and ways to share that information, my brother-in-law is in farmer Twitter, which is a, amazing place of just like shared, communication and experiences and finding out things. And, you have that kind of element of things are a little bit, easier to see, the tangible results. I think one of the things that I have seen, I've been fortunate enough to be a judge or on the judging panel for the Leopold Conservation Award, which is given to an agricultural producer who best exhibits, the legacy of Aldo Leopold and the teachings. And I was able to do that for several years. And one of the things as a committee we always talked about where there was all these, really great practices that people were doing, but in when I was growing up in late 80s, early 90s, it would have been like, wow, they're cutting edge. And as that the competition in that pool of applicants continues to grow, you see this, everybody's kind of going, the one rung up, that's become the baseline. And that then you have the opportunity to really expand, how you're using conservation practices, using data, working with, other organizations or other landowners. We also see more of, shared and tallgrass prairie management. There's a lot of prescribed burn associations where they share time and energy and equipment and have that idea that we're helping manage across fence rows as well.
What do you see as some of the most important water or ecosystem concerns that are facing the state of Nebraska right now?
Well, I think there's several. I mean, one, we're sitting in late 2020, which has also provided us basically a border-to-border drought of some, characteristic. And we are, Nebraska is is known majority of the state to have, a relative wealth of water with most stream miles and the Ogallala Aquifer. But there's that increasing demand as we move across the state, both to support, the agricultural industry, support, fish and wildlife species that depend on the Central Platte for their migration. And then when you move into the eastern part of the state, it becomes a little bit different, where it's a little bit more scarce and harder to access, and more demand for drinking water from our largest communities. And so I think one of the challenges in Nebraska will continue to be kind of balancing the 2/3 versus the third, to really simplify, the state how I see it, in this eastern third of the state that has seen, other than, this year where we're in the drought, but more and more high precipitation, high intensity storms throughout the spring season that exacerbates flooding. It puts wells at risk. It exacerbates water quality, which is a major issue, in the eastern part of the state, trying to meet that drinking water demand, in addition to fish and wildlife and recreation, and agriculture for that matter, as far as being able to utilize the water without putting pollutants back down into the groundwater. Balancing with what is, been the dominant quantity and a scarcity mindset, for the 2/3 portion of the state. And I think that will continue to be, one of the most interesting things for us to balance as a state, for water resource managers to balance, for researchers, at the university, and how you operate in those different landscapes with those different demands and increasingly challenging kind of baseline conditions.
Well, you're a relatively young woman compared to me. You're a generation below me, so younger than me. What do you see as your role as a young woman in this kind of conservation space, to get other people mindful of it, and especially people in your age group?
My current boss, our state executive director, she's also around my age, went through, wildlife management, and also looking at, resource management, and also was really focused on that ability to engage the most diverse set of partners and find that collaboration and partnership. And I think that's a strength that, I carry, she carry. Many young women or women in this field, I know, have that ability to, as a colleague and a friend of mine would say, listening is different than waiting for your turn to talk, and finding that way to help engage and make people feel, like they have a seat at that table, that their voice is valued. I think, women become increasingly involved, in agriculture and water resource management and natural resource management, which has been a very male, white dominated field, throughout time. Even just, the presence and showing up can help, broaden that idea that you can be part of this and you can make that generational impact. You can do something that you love. You can, go to pesticide applicator training like my sister and be the only woman in the room. And you can be me now working in Audubon in Nebraska, which has, I think we're about 50-50, or, a fairly significant, female women population in there, and really see that kind of transition through time. My career is 20 some years old. Thank you for saying I look so young. But that has just changed. Even when I was working with the NRD, more women on certain boards within the state certainly lags there behind, but that ability again to be present and help, drive that change and that shared management.
Well, this is the Doherty Water for Food podcast. So I wanted to ask you, how do you work with the DWFI, and what do you see as their role for the state?
I had the opportunity to work with the Doherty Water for Food Institute when I was at the NRD for a number of years, as well as then when I was just most recently with Extension before I came here. I think that the founding of that institution, and really looking at how the wealth of knowledge and resource and different landscapes that we have in Nebraska, and using that application is just amazing. And I wish the Institute well and all of the endeavors that they're doing. When I shifted out here to tallgrass prairie, my day-to-day and immediate involvement in large-scale water resource management in Nebraska is taking a little bit backseat to the waves of big blue stem that roll across the hills here. But Audubon, Nebraska has just launched a Platte River initiative. And a young woman, Melissa Mosier, has taken over as the project manager and lead on that. And that is in the beginning stages. But, I know that Doherty Water for Food is a partner that she and Audubon, Nebraska want to engage. And the idea there is to really not only work across Nebraska, but remove our state lines into Colorado and Wyoming, and work collaboratively across that entire watershed, and help facilitate research, transmission of information, ways that we can keep enough water, in the Central Platte for cranes and terns and wildlife that depend upon it, but also meet the demands for either, irrigated agriculture, or importantly, the Front Range of Colorado and Wyoming, and increasing drinking water needs. And so I think, obviously there's multiple ways that the Water for Food Institute plays a role in that effort. And we will, we are part of a smaller, more localized initiative here at Spring Creek, the Prairie Corridor on Haynes Branch. And so that's, focused on land conservation, access to these, springs and unique area of Nebraska, but also, largely trying to build that out into what that means for the larger Salt Creek watershed and back into the Platte River. Again, addressing some of those quality needs, as well as, the demands for agriculture in this area.
Well, Meghan, that is all the specific questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
As I mentioned, our trails are open sunrise to sunset. We've continued to have that throughout this pandemic. That has been one of the bright spots for me, is seeing that reward and that connection to nature. I think that's another important role of DWFI, is that to communicate and share that in a consumable manner to get people connected back to that resource. We hopefully provide a little bit of an opportunity on site for people to connect, stand on a hill, look back at Altman and Lincoln, look down at the creek, look at the agricultural fields around that, and understand kind of how we all play a part in the management of resources. So,
well, thanks so much, Meghan. Meghan Sittler, a director of the Spring Creek Prairie Audubon Center near Lincoln, Nebraska. And you can find out more about them by going to their website at springcreek.audubon.org. Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.